I'm going to turn it over to Mark to talk about what a farmer is.
Okay, I think the first thing on the syllabus is who is a farmer? Is that how it means? Who is a farmer? My name is Mark Perschwitz. I'm not in the College of Public Health. I'm in the College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment. That's our new name. You'll find that a lot of colleges in agriculture have changed their name to reflect more of what they really do. I'm an engineer by training, and I'm in the Department of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering. Most agricultural engineering departments have changed their name because they're so much heavily involved in biological systems now. And my specialty is agricultural safety and health. There aren't too many of us anymore. It used to be that every land-grant university in the country had an extension farm safety specialist, but as budgets got tight and people retired, most deans eliminated those positions. And but anyway, I've been doing this, including graduate school, where I worked half-time, about almost 30 years. So my main interest is in traumatic injury, and I'll be talking about hazards related to traumatic injury next week. But I've had a lot of experience because I'm in extension, going out and talking to farmers. I spent a lot of time in Wisconsin, a little time in South Carolina. So I've got a pretty good knowledge.
And you don't know what a land-grant college is.
Yeah.
That's what a land-grant college is. All the details.
Okay, well, very quickly, years ago, like in the early 1800s and earlier, up until the Civil War, college was really for more elite, people that had money, status. And during the Civil War, Congress and Abraham Lincoln, I'm not sure who was the leader in this, they decided that we needed an education system of colleges for the average person. And these colleges were to start by teaching agricultural projects or subjects, agriculture and mechanics. And if you ever heard of Texas A&M, that's how the A&M came from, agriculture mechanics. Anyway, they signed the Morrill Act, M-O-R-R-I-L-L, in 1862, and that established a system of universities where every state got a grant of land from the federal government that they could use to sell and take that money and start a university. And some states have two big universities. Like if you go to Indiana, they have Purdue, which is a land-grant school, and Indiana University, which is not. We're the land-grant school here. But anyway, that's where your colleges of agriculture are. And that's where agricultural engineering would be. So we look at our job in the college maybe a little differently than some other colleges because of the relationship we have with the Department of Agriculture and our mission. Well, anyway, who is a farmer is a good way to start, because most people have an idea in their head when you say, what does a farm look like? Somebody tell me what's the first thing that pops into your mind. When I say, what does a farm look like, what do you think of? Okay, just fields?
A barn.
A barn? Yeah, what do you see?
Green flowers.
Okay. Tractors. Okay. How about individuals? What do you see, like a guy in good overalls, or a lot of people do? Well, it turns out that who is a farmer is a lot different now than it used to be. And to answer the question, who is a farmer, you have to start by answering the question, what is a farm? And this is where it really, your understanding of what a farmer or who a farmer is really changes. The USDA definition, which has been in place for many years, is any place from which $1,000 or more of agricultural products were produced and sold, or would have been normally. Let's say they had a crop failure and they didn't sell them, or some cattle died, or normally would have during the year. Okay, $1,000 is a pretty small threshold. So that means a lot of people are farmers, perhaps, that you wouldn't think so. So if you had one dairy cow and sold all the milk from that cow, you could make have over $1,000 of sales. Now, this is not profit. This is just how much product you sell. A couple acres of corn, you have a big garden. In the early 1990s, my parents lived in northern Indiana. My dad was retired, and he decided he'd grow vegetables for a seminary where they had a lot of people. They had a food bank there, and he had 2.5 acres that a farmer gave him to use. And one year they calculated he grew $10,000 worth of vegetables. That was 20 years ago, so I don't know what it would be worth now. He would never think of himself as a farmer. He grew up on a tobacco farm, but that was just fun gardening for him. So, but that would be considered a farm. Or you could have a farm with 10,000 dairy cows. I think the biggest I've heard of, the place in Oklahoma's got 14,000. You could have a large California vegetable farm, with just millions of dollars in sales. A lot of you go in the store and you buy asparagus and stuff, unless it's in season locally grown. It probably came from California. You could have a ranch with hundreds of thousands of acres. Who knows who Ted Turner is? What did Ted Turner start? Yeah, you're not supposed to answer that question. Yeah, see, that shows you how things have changed because, CNN. I mean, the whole cable news thing, headline news, that didn't exist before Ted Turner. Well, he's, billionaire, and he owns, like over 2 million acres of land, about 1 million in Mexico, and he's got about 51,000 bison on his ranches. But he's considered a farmer just as much as the person who, sells $2,000 worth of vegetables. So there's a huge scale. Now, a farm could be owned by an individual, a sole proprietor. And that's what we usually think of when we think of the farmer in the big overalls, a family farm, husband and wife. You'd be surprised how many farms still exist that way, where the land or the property is only in the name of the man. And farming has been very patriarchal over the years, and so there's still cases where the farmer dies and the wife's got no, if there's no will or whatever, her name's not on the title, but sole proprietorship, they could be a partnership, 2 people, 2 brothers, or a husband and wife. Could be a family corporation where you had 3 brothers go together, or I remember in our family, some cousins, there was 1 girl and 3 brothers, and they were all in their 50s when I was in college, but they had this big farm, and it was a family corporation. Or you can have a few farms that are owned by a non-family corporation. Like at one time, Prudential Insurance thought they would get into farming, and most non-agricultural corporations get out of it because they realize it's not very profitable. It's certainly not very fast. But there are some places like that are not family companies, and they have a manager and all that kind of thing. USDA calls a small farm anything between $1,000 to $250,000 of sales in 1 year. That's quite a big range. I don't think of a farm that sells $250,000 worth of product as small, but they call that small. They call large between $250,000 and $500,000, and very large with sales of $500,000 plus. There's a variety of other definitions. You could go into the USDA documentation, and there's all different ways that these farms are classified. But overall, there's about 2.2 million farms in the U.S. I think you're going to say 2.1 million, but it's right in there. 2.1, 2.2 million. About half of them have sales of less than $10,000. About 10% of them have sales of $250,000 or more. And this largest 10% of the farms produces 80% of the product, food or fiber, or now energy products. And many full-time farmers want that definition changed because in reality, when you think of the agricultural production in this country, it really does fall mostly on that 10%. And what happens is, because we have 2.2 million farms, and someone who's not familiar with agriculture says, "Boy, look at the USDA farm programs. They're only going to all that money is only going to like 10% of the farms. That's a bad deal. 200,000 farms are getting all this money, and we've got 2.2 million farmers. Well, the 200,000 are the farms that are producing 80% of the stuff. And so a lot of farmers don't like that perception that they're, that a tiny few of them are getting all the benefits, when in fact, tiny few are making, are producing most of the product. 95% of all farms are considered family farms. That's very important because that's really much different than other businesses. and either through the sole proprietorship or the partnership or family corporation. A family farm is considered a farm that's has majority ownership and controlled by a family unit. And, they may or may not provide most of the labor. Some family farms, there's it can be quite big, and all the labor is provided by, family members. When you hear the term corporate farm, almost all of those are family corporations. There are very few non-family corporate farms. And people that don't like the way agriculture has changed over the years make a big deal about all these big corporate farms. A lot of these big corporate farms are family members that got together. They'd be idiots if they didn't incorporate themselves. And so when you hear the term corporate farm, don't think of, some big insurance company owning a farm or something like that, because that's very few of those. There are some. You go to Hawaii, where they have a lot of pineapples, and that's probably going to be owned by Dole or something like that. But most corporate farms are family farms. Now, there's a variety. This is another thing that might change your perception of what a farmer is. There's a variety of income levels and time commitments. We typically think of farmers as the operators of a larger income-generating farm. The full-time farmer that ekes out a living on a farm, or maybe has a big farm, but it's a full-time job, and again, might be family involvement, maybe not. There are a lot of farmers that do this part-time just for supplemental income. They have a full-time job, and they grew up on a farm, and they know they can make some extra money by raising some tobacco or raising some cattle. And Kentucky has a lot of those. I think a higher than normal percentage of farms in Kentucky have their primary income from off the farm. They can be part-time for a hobby or lifestyle, like Wayne. They just enjoy doing it. And there's a lot of people like that. And sometimes the term hobby farm, I don't always like to use the term hobby farm because it gets thrown around, and actually it's a lot of work. It depends whether you really think of it as a hobby, but we have what we call lifestyle farmers who do it because they just like doing this. Kentucky beef production is very well suited to this idea of a part-time farmer with a full-time job. It's probably obvious now because I'm asking the question, but of all the states east of the Mississippi River, which one do you think has the most beef cattle?
Hold on, by name. What are their names? Which state do you think has them?
I believe it's Kentucky.
Yeah, that's right. Very few people knew that. I didn't know that. I've been here 6.5 years. I did not know that. And the reason that we have all these beef cattle more than any other state east of Mississippi is because with all the hilly land we have that's suited only to pasture, that's just a perfect place to have some beef cows who have calves, and these calves are the ones that get shipped out to the feedlots out west. So that's a huge business in Kentucky, and if you want to have some beef cattle, they require relatively little care compared to other livestock. Doesn't mean that there's not a lot of work, but I mean they can take care of themselves for a lot of the time. And so Kentucky's just perfect for that. And so there's all kinds of people hidden in all the hills and valleys and all over the place that have full-time jobs and might work as professors, might work at Toyota. I'm from Georgetown, and we've got 7,000 people working up there at Toyota. They can work anywhere, and they could have some beef cattle at home. And so you put it all together, we end up having more beef cattle than any place else. Tobacco production used to be suited to this. I guess it still is, but it was more suited to it back when they had a quota system where you were allowed to, each person was allowed to grow a certain amount of tobacco that was allocated to them, or they purchased that from somebody, but originally allocated by the government. And so you got a really good price for that. And they've done away with the quota system, so now it's not so, doesn't bring in so much money. But it used to be that, when tobacco prices were real high, if you had a couple acres of quota, you could put your kid through college just by growing tobacco. They grow tobacco in Wisconsin, by the way. A woman I worked with for a number of years grew up on a dairy farm. Her dad had like 2, 3, 4 acres of tobacco, and that paid for her college. So who is a farmer? All types of different levels of time commitment. A full-time farmer with a part-time job may have a full-time outside job and be a part-time farmer. You can have all different ways. There are a lot of full-time farmers who also work off the farm, or maybe their wife works off the farm for benefits. There are a few that are full-time in both. I know people that have a full-time professional job, and then they go home and they've got a 60-cow dairy farm, which is a full-time job, and they do all of that. And this makes I'll throw this in, it makes a big difference if you ever look at death certificate data, because death certificates, unless they change, they're always based on the primary occupation. So if you were to die of a farm-related injury, your occupation would be professor, and so they'd say, like, well, this wasn't work-related because your job's a professor, and so this is, it's not a work-related fatality or Joan. I remember one time in Bloomington, Indiana, the chief of staff of the hospital down there was killed in a tractor overturn. And I'm sure on his death certificate, his full-time job was physician, so this wouldn't be work-related, even though he was doing farm work. So that's an important thing just to remember. And what these farmers do depends kind of on the labor model. And this is a loose term that I use. I had a sociologist tell me when I was down in Clemson, South Carolina is the Deep South. And he said that the farms here are still based on what we call the plantation model. He's a real sociologist. And it is true. You drive around South Carolina, you see the farmer dressed in khakis and a pickup truck, and there are a lot of relatively low-paid African-American workers out there. And some of them live on the farm, and they don't have health insurance, but the farm takes care of them. They get sick. They take them to the hospital. I don't want to say they're indentured servants, but in a lot of ways they're kind of tied there. And but whether they are or not, in the Deep South, the plantation model is kind of where farms came from. That's much different than the family farm model, which is more prevalent in the Midwest. It started as a small farm where all labor was provided by the family. Now the farm grows and they may have more hired labor. Some immigrant workers are showing up on these family farms, especially in dairy farms, because when they get big, where they're milking cattle 24 hours a day, or 23 and a half hours, so they have a half hour for cleaning, they're milking thousands of cows. If you want to stand there and milk cows for 8 hours a day, more power to you, but it's not a very desirable job. And most big farmers will tell you it's hard to find people that want to do these jobs. And so that's where the immigrants come in. And up in Wisconsin, which is the most German state in the country, and had 30, 40 years ago, had very few African Americans and very few Hispanics. Most of those big farmers have Mexican people milking their cows, and they think that's the greatest thing. And these are not migrants. They live there now. And there's some little towns that have become very Mexican, and they like their work ethic. But the bottom line is they do work that other people won't do. So you have a lot of immigrant workers now working, or some working on these full-time farms. There's also the industrial model where the farmer's a manager with department heads, and they have an HR department. That's what you'd find, say, at a Dole pineapple plantation, or some of these big vegetable growers out in California. Some of the hog operations now, many of them in Iowa are integrated, where the Tyson's or whoever actually sells the pork or the poultry actually owns the animals, and there's these huge operations, and so they're going to have managers and hire labor. It's going to be more like a corporation type of thing. Anyway, don't forget that non-farmers also have they have aspects of farm operations that have the hazards of farming. A lot of tractors are owned by non-farmers. I used to only pay attention to farm-related fatalities, including tractor-related fatalities. If it wasn't a farmer, I kind of put that off in a separate category. Now that I'm older, it doesn't make that much difference to me who's on the tractor, but there's lots of recreational horse owners. There's people that heat with wood and cut their own wood, firewood. They don't do it as a business. They could, but some people just cut it just for their own heat, and yet they have the chainsaw hazards. And lastly, I want to say that terminology does matter. Okay, ranchers do not like to be called farmers. In Texas, especially, I have a son and daughter-in-law in Texas. They'll tell you that, ranchers down there, don't call them a farmer. They think of that as something more, the guy that digs in the dirt, and that's kind of the way they look at it. And a rancher, has big acreages with cattle and rides around on a horse. So we talk about farmers and ranchers. I use the term farmers generically, but for some people it makes a big difference. Some people prefer to be called growers, like the vegetable growers. Even the grain farmers, a lot of times they'd rather be called a corn producer or a beef producer rather than a farmer. But the terminology can vary. The term farm worker, one word, that often implies migrant labor. I see that a lot more in public health circles. Right? When they really talk about a farm worker, they're talking about migrant labor. And like on a family farm, you can have hired workers that are not migrants. They're employees. They might call them a hired hand. It might be unpaid family labor. So the message in all that, basically in my whole talk, is that if you're looking at data, look at the fine print and see who's included. The size of the farm makes a difference. Number of employees might make a difference on how the data is collected. Who's covered, did they include the unpaid family members or not? Always look at the fine print. So the bottom line is, a farmer's not probably what you thought he or she was. There's a huge variety, and Dr. Sanderson's going to give you all the nitty-gritty on what these farms do and what the numbers look like.
Is there sort of negative stigma associated with labeling yourself as a farmer? That last slide that you presented kind of showed different groups who don't want to be called farmers. So,
in some circles, I think ranchers don't like to be called farmers just as it's a kind of a matter of pride, because there are people in Texas that raise a lot of crops and they just want to be distinguished from that. But I think maybe in big cities, a farmer is, it's kind of a lower person. I mean, that's probably changing, and I don't want to generalize, but I have a feeling that for a lot of people, being called a farmer, they assume that they don't have college degrees, that they just, kind of do stuff, a lot of manual labor, and farming is becoming very sophisticated, and there's a lot of high technology involved. So it kind of depends on what a person thinks. But the rancher thing is just more of a, somehow they just, like, we're ranchers, we're not farmers. Not that we hate farmers, but, we're ranchers. If you buy a Ford pickup truck, you can buy a King Ranch model, which is a special deluxe pickup truck named after the King Ranch, which is a 800,000-acre ranch in Texas that's been in business since 1853. They're so big that they started their own breed of cattle, and it's one of the most widely known ranches in the world. And so Ford even markets a King Ranch pickup. So, it could be a big deal.
Well, that's a good segue into my part of the lecture. John, where'd you grow up? St. Louis, right? I grew up in St. Louis. Yeah. And not the inner city, but kind of a suburb of St. Louis, right? St. Louis has the inner city, and then it has and I'm sure that in your Ladue High School, right? Is that where you went to high school, Ladue?
it is.
That's what I thought. I've been to Ladue. Ladue is one of the most exclusive, richest places in the St. Louis area. Not that John
grew up in Normandy.
Okay. But if you were called a farmer at Ladue High School, I could see why there might be some stigma associated with that. But farmers are doing very well. Thank you very much. Median income for the farms in the country is $69,300, and that's well above the national median income for the nation, for the average household. Now, that's not, as Mark said, there's a broad spectrum of farms, right? There's some people who are just barely getting by, but in general, farming has changed dramatically. And in many communities, the bigger farmers are some of the wealthier people in the communities, and most established, most prominent people in those communities. This work group is expected now. Something we're going to talk about is the National Farm Census. The National Agricultural Statistics Services does a farm census every 5 years. Okay, so we did one in 2012. The data is now out, and I think I put that data. You can go and get more in-depth data, but I gave you a piece of that on Blackboard. But you could go to that website and get all kinds of information about farming and farm commodities. And in fact, you're going to have to throughout the class to do your homework, and then for any of your research questions, that is extremely valuable data. The last one before that was 2007. And we devour that information because it tells us how things are changing in agriculture. And one of the things that's going to change is this work group is expected to decline about another fifth over the next 5 years. We have fewer and fewer farms in the country every year. What do you think is happening to farm production? We have never been more productive in the history of the world. It is amazing, a massive amount of food. They can show, you walk down the street and look at the people. We're not getting any skinnier either. We're eating very well in the developed world, and we are able to produce more and more food cheaper with fewer people